Contemplating, interviewing. You know that's what they doing. Stick around. It's about to get all roomy up in here. Remote Ruby starts now.
Go, 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 go,
Happy
go.
Friday.
Your background looks a lot nicer.
It'll be much nicer soon. I have boxes that are too big for me to bring upstairs by myself. Coffee table, TV stand, couch comes on Monday. So it'll all look nice. I guess I need to get a TV. It'll probably go over here.
For those who cannot picture this, usually when we record, there's a computer PC in the background. It's got a bunch of lights on it. It's very distracting. So
now I have these two lights that are not RGB and not moving.
Yeah, I feel a lot more peaceful now that we're recording.
Yeah, I just got tired of that mess over there. I was like, moved into this house 2 years ago now, and finally it's time to just finish the office and make it look nice and whatever. I still got to do some cable management and stuff for these lights on the shelf back here, but I 3D printed some Game Boy Color stands. It's got a little nub that goes in the headphone jack to hold it in there. My parents are like going through their house with all my old junk and whatever, because they're about to break ground on their house, hopefully in the next month. So my mom's going through every room and just listing stuff on Facebook Marketplace, throwing stuff away and whatever. So she brought down these old video games and other things that were in my room, I guess, which is fun because now I'm like, ooh, the old boxes for like some of these games that are on CD-ROMs from way back in the day, like Diablo 1 and stuff. So I'm excited.
You're living nostalgia.
Yeah, it is. Definitely. But I'm going to enjoy having a place to sit that is not an office chair in my desk or my office as well. Having a couch and coffee table and stuff will be nice because as I've complained to you recently about my Intel iMac being slow as hell, it is still useful to do stuff like AMD 64 architecture stuff, but my M1 Mac is way faster, but it's still slow compared to the M4s that will come out this year or whatever. So occasionally using my laptop for things, there's no place to sit that is comfortable or whatever. So and then having a couch and all that will be nice. I got my 3D printer all set up with a big old stack of filament and everything else over there. So I tucked my computer in this area. It's just enough to fit a rack of hardware stuff, my like soldering iron and other stuff. All that junk was around. Very happy to have it organized finally.
It's nice. It's looking good. I guess I haven't been on an episode of Remote Ruby in a while, but I've talked to you. So I will recap one of our conversations when we hung out last week.
Uh-oh. This could be embarrassing.
I will recap one of our technical conversations from last week.
Oh, okay. Also could be embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had some performance problems with the old job boardly, the little business I run on the side, where effectively my database just got kind of crippled. I ran Postgres on DigitalOcean. It was managed and effectively thought there was some kind of issue with the database. Rage migrated it to Crunchy, which was good because I wanted to do that anyway. Crunchy data, we use it at Podia. It's really good. This is their unofficial sponsorship where they give us no money and I just talk about how much I love Crunchy. But that didn't fix the problem. Turns out it was a max threads issue, a web concurrency issue. So effectively, I guess in Rails 8 or maybe in 7.2, whenever it comes out, they've changed the default max threads from 5 to 3. And DHH says in Basecamp, hey, one of those apps, they effectively run one thread per process. And the trade-off is quicker response times, lower throughput. Because that's actually what I was seeing was really long response times, but great throughput. But that doesn't matter as much to me if the response times are slow because people just want their content. So I reduced mine from 5 to 3 and all of a sudden my database, like I had queries that were just locking up. I run PG Bouncer. Like I have this whole thing set up and I couldn't figure it out. But adjusting the max threads fixed it. But that whole process made me like, oh, while I'm here, like I'll reevaluate some of my deployment and server stuff. And I talked to you last week about experimenting with Kamal. And after 3 weeks, I finally have it figured out. And so we could talk about that if you want.
Sure. You're going to have to redo it here in a couple months when Kamal 2 comes out.
Well, 1.7 came out and it validates your configuration. So I'm sure I've got something wrong already. I'm sure it'll cripple that.
I've set up Kamal a few times. It's not bad. It's the typical YAML manual, like setting up things and brute forcing and retrying and changing things and whatever to get it right. So it doesn't have a magical experience yet. It can be, like you said, take 3 weeks to figure it out. And you weren't spending full time 3 weeks on that, but it's kind of I got closer and then something isn't working right, and then go back and tweak it. Could maybe come back tomorrow and try it again. And I've definitely had that experience.
It's not near as simple as a Hatchbox where you just give it your app and it runs. What it highlighted for me, though, is how much I thought I knew about networking, but how little I knew about networking. The biggest problem for me was instead of doing Kamal on easy mode, I was like, oh, I'm going to try and spin this up on AWS, which is where I lost a lot of time because with AWS, we talked about this last week when you were here, like you have to configure a VPC and then like make sure you have an internet gateway and subnets are set up. And if you want to use a load balancer, you have to use 2 subnets. Like there's all these gotchas. I restarted from scratch so many times. So then I was about to give up and I was like, okay, let me try like the happy path. The DHH, I made a YouTube video, happy path. Just spun up a DigitalOcean instance, deployed, it worked. And I was like, okay, baby step from there. Effectively ended up using Hetzner for this and spun up just 2 app instances, deployed the app to it, and then put a load balancer at Hetzner in front of it. Because that's the other thing is I run custom domains and Kamal doesn't really have a good story for like supporting multiple user custom domains. So that was a tricky part. I use a service called saascustomdomains.com. If you want to know how I found that, guess what I Googled? SaaS custom domains. It was the first result. It's a jumpstart app. It's fantastic. Anyway, he sends me a header that has X served 4 maybe. Yeah, X served 4, and it's got the actual like domain it's trying to send. It routes to customdomains.jobworthy.com. For Rails to trust that host, it has to be like X forwarded host. You and I went through this with the caddy setup for this. In Cloudflare, when that header is present, I create an X forwarded host header with that value in Cloudflare, which is really nice to be able to do that. Send it to my load balancer on Hetzner, which then terminates the HTTPS connection. I actually have both of my servers on Hetzner. They're not accessible from the internet except for SSH. So like that's kind of nice. Something I've never done before. That was 3 weeks of work for me because I just kept getting all these false starts. Feels good now. I feel like I understand it more. And then I thought, okay, now it's time to like spin up a worker. That was fine, except like I use Chromium, but I only need Chromium in my worker. So I didn't necessarily want to like pollute the Docker image with Chromium. Kamal has the concept of accessories. That's how they like recommend running like MySQL, Postgres, stuff like that. I'm running Chromium in accessory. It starts up a Chromium instance and it's exposed by a port. The worker can talk to that. So that was kind of cool. But holy hell, I don't know. Like you said earlier, just so much throwing things into a config and be like, will this work?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a rough go. I feel better for it.
Yeah. It's just not far from the Heroku experience. It is if you're doing the basics, the very basics, but it requires quite a bit of knowledge and all these little nuances of you strip your SSL at the load balancer or whatever. Your web apps then have to trust the X forwarded protocol header so that it can say, okay, you gave me HTTP, but I guess the original connection was SSL. So then
I got to say though, I feel better now that I'm on the other end of this. Like I feel like I understand it more, but it feels like maybe my use case is different because I host sites for people. So like I have domains. It's not just app.jobworthy.com, but I feel like there's still something missing from the start to finish. There's a lot of things about getting started, and there's a lot of things about how you can configure it, but not really like any guides for how to get all the way there.
Yeah, especially on a more complex setup like you've got. We were helping some Hatchbox customers this week on similar complex things and whatever. And it's funny. I don't know that this ever crossed my mind when you were mentioning load balancer earlier. Is one of the things that I had read in the caddy issues where someone had a feature request. The load balancer can retry requests, which is handy. If we send it to one upstream and it doesn't work, send it to another one. That only does that for GET requests because they are safe. And I thought that was pretty interesting because we had a customer ask, well, it seems to only be sending GET requests. Yeah, that's a good question. How does that work? And then read into it and I was like, oh yeah, of course, it doesn't make sense to send the post request 2 times to the web servers because that would be dangerous.
Oh yeah.
So the load balancer doesn't have a lot of knowledge of the actual application stuff that's happening. Your app could send a 500 error back or something. Well, then what does the load balancer do in that case? The request failed because of something internal on the server. Well, if it just didn't respond, then it would probably be safe to like send the post request to a different host. But if you got any response from that upstream, then you probably want to just say, okay, that's what it is, and we don't retry it or whatever. But it's also interesting because there could be other servers in between, right? So there could be like something on the server. For example, you have Caddy as a load balancer sending it to Caddy as just a front proxy before Rails. And then the load balancer doesn't know, was Caddy or Rails the one that was having issues? And so it's really kind of tricky for you to build that stuff unless you like build your own custom thing that has idempotency keys and stuff in the headers or whatever, like with the Stripe API, for example, if you've ever used that and seen those. So yeah, it is one of those things that is tricky. We had for example, health checks. Sounds simple. We just asked for a request. Is it 200 or not? Well, we had somebody turn it on Hatchbox, and what was happening was it would send the request. The apps, you can run multiple apps on one server, which is one of the features like Kamal 2, I think is going to have, if I remember right. So we load balance to that and have to give it a domain so that it goes to the right application for its uptime check instead of just generally the server being up, like the Caddy instance. And so that happened, but it was failing. And it was because we set the host for the request, but we also needed to set X forwarded protocol. So it was, oh, this is an HTTPS request that we've already stripped. So their force SSL being turned on, or even Caddy will do its own automatic SSL redirect. We had to just, hey, this was an SSL request. Just trust us on this one in order for like those uptime checks to work. And it's, gosh, how do you go debug some of those things? Because like that request will fail, and it was trying to get it to Rails from one other machine, but you didn't see any of the requests in certain logs. Maybe if we turned the debug log on Caddy, we might have seen it, but like the info log level wasn't showing us the redirect or anything there. We never saw the request in Rails. But if you ran it yourself, then sometimes if you went directly to the domain, then it worked. So what the heck is going on here? And man, it gets in the weeds so fast.
I lost so much time deploying, hoping. And
Yeah.
I understand a lot better. I'm happy now. There were a couple of things that instantly were better for me. I needed to build VIPs from source because there's a fix in a new like C-level version of VIPs that I have people that use JFIF files. I can't remember what. It's actually like a valid extension for just a very common image type. And so I just get a bunch of errors on that. In Hatchbox, it's like a server I could log in, build it myself, but I ran multiple. Again, it was trial and error where like at least with Docker, I could just write all the commands. And if it could build locally, I was okay. I can trust that this will then build in production. And so that was nice. That feedback loop was better. But again, I only got that feedback loop after weeks of effort. So wins and losses, but we'll see how it pans out. So far, I'm happy with it. I've got 2 servers running the app, 2 servers running the workers. And then I have 1 server that just runs my accessories, which is the Chromium and stuff like that. So pretty cool.
Yeah, that's fun. I'm excited to see what I assume that Kamal 2 is coming out around Rails 8 in September, but I don't know. But I'm excited to see that. We've got our old deploy Rails guide on Go Rails. Partially wrote it to explain why you need Nginx or Caddy or Apache or whatever in front of Rails to serve up static files and how processes work and all that. But I had been considering rewriting that in Kamal, and I'm like, I don't know. Because I was complaining to you last weekend about Docker in general just not being stable because it wouldn't run Ruby 3.3 on my M1 Mac because of the concurrency bug that took a long time for Ruby to release a new version. And that was a pain. So we had to compile Ruby from scratch. And then I forget what the other issue was. Oh, my Intel Mac was just had a bug where it would segfault Node.js all the time. So we couldn't use that. Then I tried using Kamal, but the multi-architecture builds took over an hour to compile a Docker image. As soon as it got to a couple of the gems with C extensions, it had to go compile those for the multiple architectures or whatever. And it was pretty fast, but it took 15 minutes or more for one gem. Then it would go through a couple others and hit another gem that took 45 minutes. And every time I was like, Docker's broken. So I would cancel it and change something and try and rerun it. And then I'd run Kamal again. It would go do the multi-architecture build. And it took me a few tries before I realized that's got to be the issue. And then I let it run and went and picked up my kid from daycare and had dinner and came back and saw that, oh, it worked, but it took an hour and a half or something to make one Docker image. Yeah, I don't know if I'm ready to change our deploy Rails guides to be like, oh, here's this giant black box that you won't ever understand, especially as a beginner. I was like, I don't know. But that said, the trade-off is you got to learn Ruby version managers. You've got to install those. You got to add systemd processes to run Puma, have Capistrano restart those, whatever. Install Caddy, compile Caddy with the plugins you need. Hopefully you don't need anything special for that, but maybe you're using wildcard DNS records and you might need SSL for Let's Encrypt and API keys and whatever. And it's still a lot of stuff to learn. I think it's way easier to learn that because it is just unfortunate that Docker, and a lot of people are using OrbStack and other alternatives that are Docker compatible that actually are a lot more reliable and stuff and faster and whatever.
Until now, observability was metrics, logs, and traces. It was reliability budgets, error rates, and latencies. It was big acronyms on a central dashboard. In short, it was what the ops team cared about, not the developers. But Honeybadger is changing that. Of course, you need the big picture, the single pane of glass that lets you know what your system is doing and that it's operating normally. But individual users matter too. User experience is more than just a line on a dashboard. Honeybadger's observability platform lets you drill down into the details, into the individual user experiences that drive product development and your business forward. It helps you understand your product and your users as much as it does your systems and performance. Honeybadger's free developer plan includes error tracking, uptime monitoring, custom charts and dashboards, and 50 megabytes per day of structured event logging. To get started, visit honeybadger.io. That's www.honeybadger.io.
I'm still using Docker Desktop, which is probably my issue on here.
OrbSec's, it's much better for me. I would like to figure out how to use Docker Cloud to build the image, because Kamal just builds it locally using BuildX on your machine.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a way to do it right now. Like you can do remote builders, but they're like SSH connections into them, or like I could have GitHub Action that built it, but I don't run any GitHub Actions right now. I kind of like the idea of being able to be like Kamal deploy. I'll probably eventually wire it up to build from main, but right now I like the simplicity of it.
I don't know. It'll be there one day, but it is definitely not easy yet. One of the things that's made me a little sad is the Passenger used to be, I remember when Passenger came out as a C extension for Nginx and Apache, and it was Passenger 5, and they had a big announcement and they're hyping it up a lot, and everybody was really excited about it because it was hella fast. Their docs and stuff, as far as I can tell, somebody was like, yeah, they don't even support Ubuntu Noble in their repository yet, and their docs looked like there were quite a few versions of Ubuntu behind and stuff, and I don't know what's going on. I haven't heard anything from Fusion for a long time, marketing wise or whatever, so I don't know if they're moving on from it or not, but the convenience of like you just install the Passenger package and it just runs Rails for you, and you just restart Nginx if you need to reboot your Rails app, that wasn't bad. It was very easy. Like a step was taken out of that for you for having to manage the Puma process separately or whatever. So I was always super keen on that approach. It took one thing out of managing the production server for beginners and stuff, but not sure what's going on over there, but I'm sure it's kind of a hard business to just sell people on and whatever. It's interesting because compare that business model of running this production server to Sidekiq. It seems very similar, but when you're using Sidekiq, you're using Sidekiq. Passenger in production is just kind of intended to be more or less invisible for you. You probably need metrics and other things in production to see request queues and all that stuff, but you are not developing against features of Passenger when you're using Passenger. But when you're using Sidekiq, you know you're using Sidekiq, you're taking advantage of features, you're in their docs and all this stuff, and you feel like you're using something and you know what you're paying for there because you're dependent on it. And then with Passenger, it's almost too invisible, which is like a good thing, but also can feel like a bad thing where you're like, oh, we got to pay for Passenger Enterprise, but we don't ever like touch it ourselves that much. It just runs on our server in production. So it's interesting to see that little difference there.
Another thing I want to talk about, I don't know, I think maybe I've talked about a little bit, and I want to be clear. So I want to talk about Honeybadger Insights. Honeybadger is a sponsor, but they hardly ask anything of us. I'm literally just talking about this because I've been using it. Honeybadger Insights, fantastic tool for like sending logs, things like that to Honeybadger. And they have this thing called the Badger QL, the query language, which lets you parse those logs and do all kinds of searching and filtering and aggregating. It's awesome. And they're continually like working on it. It's still a pretty new feature. They have dashboards now. They have a pre-built one for Rails. And I set it up, I guess a month or so back, maybe a couple months. And I had to use Vector, which is a log parsing and sending tool made actually by Datadog. And it was not the easiest thing, but Honeybadger, they went out of their way to help me set it up. But now it's as easy as just update your Honeybadger gem and just say like insights enabled true. And now it doesn't send your log files that way, but what it does send is a ton of Rails metrics. I guess it hooks into like the instrumentation. So like it sends you like cache reads and SQL queries, things like that. It's so awesome. And it works out of the box with their Rails dashboard. And it is so good.
We just enabled it this week. I have a screencast where I added a -- insights flag to the Honeybadger gem install command. We can just turn it on. There'll be a screencast of that because I made it'd be nice to have this because I would love to just have it enabled by default on all my apps and stuff. But it required you to go edit the config file. So I was like, oh, it'd be cool to just have this in the gem. So now there's a flag for it. But we enabled that on GoRails, and it's great having the exact same tool for error monitoring and all this other stuff. I wouldn't consider it just a performance metrics thing at all, because it actually will create records for every email that's sent out to you as an error comes in, and it has all these records of the uptime checks and their responses.
Yep.
So then it's basically just a big old database of events that you can then turn into graphs and stuff. So what you do when you turn on the Rails stuff, it's just getting those events from Rails where it's, here's a request. It took this long, this many database queries, this partial took this long, whatever. And they're aggregating all that stuff and have a default Rails dashboard that's cool. Just turn it on, enable that dashboard, and then you can see your requests per whatever time period here, like every 15 minutes or something. It'll group those together and show you the requests and the distribution of how many requests finished between 0 and 100 milliseconds. And you can customize all this. And I think out of the box, it'll show you like the last 3 hours of all of that activity. Yep. So then you have your current look at things, but you also have the ability to go back and say, like, here's the last 7 days worth of response times. What are our slow controller actions and things like that? It's cool. It's way more powerful than just a generic, here's what New Relic gives us or whatever, and we'll analyze just what they give us. Basically, it's a big old database of information that you can go do what you want with, which is cool. I haven't used New Relic in a long time, so maybe you can do that kind of stuff with that. But
I just tried out a bunch of them. I tried out New Relic. I tried out Sentry. And the thing that those have that was missing was they have a bunch of stuff set up out of the box for you. When I first started using Honeybadger Insights, like it had just launched. So here's the query language, like go build your dashboards yourself. So now that they have even this like pre-built Rails one, that's already a huge step ahead. There's so much potential too. It's not just all the things that happen like necessarily in your Rails app. It'll also aggregate SolidQ, Sidekiq, all these like metrics and stuff.
And that's the stuff too that just saying enable insights for Rails, it knows to look for SolidQ and Sidekiq and a few other things that are very common or popular, so you don't even have to worry about that, which I thought that was cool.
And again, shout out support, because when I turned it on, I went over my quota. Yeah,
me too. Well, and I didn't know. I don't have any idea of what metrics they're sending and how much each metric might cost, like storage wise. And so I turned it on and it was, you're using 130% after like an hour. And I was, oh, okay.
I got to 300 or 400%. They're like, it's automatically like, we're done. This has been fun. Yeah. I emailed and I was like, hey, I was sending logs before. I wasn't near this much. Any tips? Josh actually wrote me back this email. He actually used Insights to show me, hey, you sent this many SQL logs. You sent this many things. You just have a lot of data. And so it helped me figure out what's important, what's not. I ended up having to turn off SQL, which was a little bit of a bummer because I kept upgrading and I just send so much SQL, I guess. So I'm so happy with this tool. We use Scalar at Podia and it's really good. But this Badger query language, I just love it so much. I just have fun like writing queries in my data. Like you said, it's just like one big database of all the shit that's happened to your app. It's awesome.
Yeah. It's cool because when you generate the Rails dashboard, you get some examples of, we want to filter all the events that are for action controller. And then we want to count how many were in this time bin. And you get examples of how that works. And it's pretty awesome to see that. And then like, oh, now I have ideas. This would be helpful if I like ranked by agony of the request, where it's this one might be slow, but it only is ever used once a day. But this one's, it's pretty fast actually, but it's used so much. It's actually one of the things we should invest our time in, having those counts and then being able to like build your own stuff. And I know that's kind of their goal is, okay, the metrics themselves are useful, but making them actionable is kind of what Honeybadger is all about, which is looking at your errors. And then basically one of my favorite things is, I was just telling Josh about this. Honeybadger is great because when I do a deployment, it kind of like assumes that all of the issues are going to be cleared out so that everything from that deployment on, we can see like, oh, this is still happening. Because one of the issues that I've always had with other things is if you just got a whole list of all of our errors that come up, it just becomes this overwhelming backlog of things that we just kind of give up on trying to whittle down. So when I do a deployment and everything's clean and there's nothing, and then we see, oh, there was one error in the past hour, I'm going to go look at that one error because it's only one error and it doesn't feel overwhelming. And I'm going to go try to fix it. And it's stuff like that that really is tiny, but makes a big difference for me. I feel like I have a good handle over our errors and things like that. And then now we'll have all the performance stuff to also keep an eye on, all in the same tool, which is cool.
I have some periodic jobs. That's what they're called in Sidekiq. They're basically, instead of cron tasks, they live in solid queue, interval scheduled jobs that run. And I have some, Honeybadger has a check-in feature. Whenever I run one of those jobs, I just make a little Honeybadger call and I tell it, hey, you should hear from this every 10 minutes. And if you don't, let me know. And like you said, it's just nice to have all this in one place. I feel like the infrastructure of Jobboardly is starting to come together and Honeybadger is a big part of it. So it's fun.
That's great. Yeah, I'll use that feature too all the time to basically just monitor my cron jobs and make sure they're working. But you can also use that for all kinds of other things too. It doesn't have to be just for that. It's just a cool way to have a periodic check-in and make sure that, yep, did this run? Yes or no?
I'm going to make a Apple shortcut that Andrew has to hit once a day just so we know Andrew's alive and well.
There you go.
And
Yeah.
Honeybadger will alert me if I don't hear from Andrew.
Yes, there you go.
It's good to chat. I need anyone listening to please tweet. I'm going to call it that. Tweet me your office chair recommendations because my $200 Walmart chair is falling apart. And I know people love their chairs and I want to hear about it.
I've had this Aeron chair that I bought used off Craigslist or something, Facebook Marketplace. No, Facebook Marketplace probably didn't exist back then. Bought it off somebody.
MySpace Marketplace.
350. Yeah. Live Journal Marketplace. Dude, I paid $350 for it a long time ago. Still just as good as it was back then. It's $1,800 brand new or something. But man, the Herman Miller stuff is pretty darn good. It's been hard to find other good chairs like that. They charge you. If you buy it brand new from them, they charge you because they know it's good. But
I got to get something. It occurred to me the other day, I've had this desk from IKEA, this standing desk.
Yep.
And it's been such a good desk. I've had it almost 10 years. It kind of wobbles a bit. This is the 5th chair I've had in the last 10 years. It may be even more. I spend so much freaking time at my desk. Why don't I just invest in like something decent? So
it's one of those things that you interact with more than anything else, even more than your keyboard and mouse. You're sitting in your chair the entire time. You're looking at your monitor the entire time. But you take those things for granted because you're just sitting in it.
Right. It's just holding me up, right?
It's the Fusion Passenger thing where like it exists, but I don't work on my chair.
That's a hell of a callback.
Dang. All right, man. This is good. Enjoy your weekend. Stay out of the heat. I'm sure it's hot down there still.
It's a hot one.
Hot ones. I'm going to go eat some spicy wings now.
Can't believe we've come all this way.